Thank you very much, Dirk. My name is Mobeen Rafiq. I'm from Micro Small Medium Enterprises Limited. I must congratulate Dirk. It's a superb session, and especially, yes, especially to Helen. You see, exactly this is what happened 30 years ago. I did the similar thing in Pakistan as you have done in Ethiopia. And I tell you one thing, that was the time I started manufacturing 67% components for Fiat tractor. And that was a time I met a lot of Japanese there in Pakistan. They moved in and they had the same thing I learned from them. I asked them one question, why are you here in Pakistan? Why don't you produce the cars in Japan? They said, no, Japan is too small country-wise, area-wise. You are a big country. So we'll bring the components, we'll train you people, and from there we'll export our products. Super policy. So I think China is doing the same thing, and now they have taken 2,000-acre land in Gwadar, and they are planning to bring the components from China to Gwadar, and from there, which is a CPAC. So I think I must congratulate you. It's a very wide topic, but the most beautiful thing I would like to really mention is skill development. Yes. Skill development. Please, the European companies, if they can only concentrate in providing skill development, that is more than enough.
Okay.
Josephine Osikena from the Foreign Policy Centre. Just a quick question to anyone on the panel, and that's the role of diasporas and remittances in helping support and promote Africa's industrialisation.
Okay.
Three very quick points. Antonio Andreoni from SOAS, University of London. Three very quick points. I'm a bit surprised because some of the work that John was referring to actually has been very well known since the 70s. I'm thinking about the CATS program in Latin America, or the work of Bashar Jalal and all the traditional UNIDO. And I think that indeed recently we've been seeing quite a lot of economists entering into this field, but actually not opening the black box. And actually the question would be to what extent we are able to understand the real structural heterogeneity that we have within manufacturing and industry, because this is part of this dynamic process. If we still use standard categories, averages, domestic versus foreign firms, I don't think we are going in that direction. Second point is that the experience of countries who managed to industrialize are those who have been able, as Machivo was stressing, to align micro and macro condition. And the alignment issue is critical because it's a matter of timing, it's a matter of how the resources are prioritized and managed. And the third point, I very much like your presentation, and I think remind us that we need not only economists, but engineers and people who know the shop floor, because at the end it's micro level efficiency that make the difference. But 2 points. The first one is really how do we address the problem of organizational capabilities, which is not simply skills development at the individual level, but is at the collective level. And this is actually Penrose's theory of the firm, the idea that actually productivity comes from a coordination of actors. And the second very quick point, and in this sense I disagree with you, is that we need to think about the political settlement. Here I'm referring to the work of Mushtaq and SOS as well, that implicitly was mentioned before by our DFID representative, in the sense that leadership not necessarily might be the only condition to get these things going.
Okay, maybe we go to the right now. If we go there, so there's a gentleman at the back, and then we go to the front here. Thanks.
Thank you for a very interesting panel discussion. My name is Ayo, and I run a product design consultancy in London, doing some work with Camisa at the moment. I just wondered what, for the panel, the role of product design and user experience in bringing products to a high premium level as part of that demand. There's a phrase somebody used here, Africa demand. I can't remember what exactly the phrase is. So I'm just curious as to what the thoughts are on that.
Very good. And then Jody.
Thank you very much, Jodie Keane from the Commonwealth Secretariat. Excellent panel. Just one question for John Page. You mentioned about the negative competitiveness effects with regards to outward-orientated agglomeration. But within your recommendations, you're still advocating special economic zones and so on. So I was just wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit further as to what those negative competitiveness effects are and how they could be more effectively mitigated. Thank you.
Okay, the lady here.
Again, it's to John, but some of the other panel members, they're excellent examples. For example, in Rwanda, is an outcome of one of the questions that I'm going to ask. You said fundamental in your summary points was infrastructure development. One of the key drivers for sustained industrialization is energy development. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how your discussions about why and the blockages, etc. Going back to Rwanda, one of the aspects in post-conflict or post-genocide reconstruction, one of the interventions was reorganizing the governance, and a key factor that they looked at when their 2020 division was looking at their energy sector and bringing it together with ICT as well. And therefore, the successful garment factory that you had didn't come out of the blue with the people and the entrepreneurs coming in to link the macro and the micro. It had already been developed to have those macro conditions for down the line these visions to be realized based fundamentally on energy.
Okay.
Robert Graham, Crown Agents. I just wondered, the word hasn't come up yet, as an excellent panel, about procurement. How may donor fund procurement, using the donor procurement rules, and indeed government's rules, how can that help sustainable industrialisation and private sector development?
Okay. That's quite a long set of questions. What I will do is first ask John to respond to the comments, and then to sort of ask the panel if they have anything else to add, but it could only be very minor points that you can raise in the time available. John, over to you.
Okay, let me start with the question about outward orientation and competition, because if I left the impression with anyone that these competitive effects were in fact in the export market, to use Washington jargon, I misspoke, okay? Due to jet lag, no doubt. No, the issue is when you're serving a domestic market, and the domestic market is not very well integrated, which is the case in places like Cambodia and Ethiopia, then what you get is local competition. And so there's this trade-off between the productivity-enhancing effects of being near people who are doing the same thing you're doing and the fact that they're all your competitors. Once you switch to the export market, well, we know that the law of one price is not, kind of a graven truth. For the most part, any individual firm faces an infinitely elastic demand curve. So that's where they disappear, and that's why we stay very much on this argument that special economic zones are important, because they allow you to combine putting people together who are doing largely the same thing without the negative problems that occur when you're trying to serve the domestic economy. Okay, so that's the point there. To your point on the heterogeneity of firms, I was smiling to myself because when you reach my age, you always recall the golden era of when things in economics hadn't been reinvented. And of course, in the 1970s, in addition to Jorge Katz and others, Larry Westphal, Howie Pack, myself, others thought we had discovered that, there was a lot of heterogeneity among firms, especially in developing countries, and that was a real important locus for research. It's just the profession forgot us for about 40 years, so I'm delighted to see that I'm coming back to the future at my late stage in my career. But the point you make is very important. Understanding what to do about that, understanding what the drivers are that cause that distribution to shift, and thinking about that in public policy terms, I think, to come back to Alan's point, is really, really important. And that's, I think, one of the things we try to emphasize in the work. And finally, because I do want other people to have a chance to respond to some of these, let me just come back to Nick's point about, did we answer the question? And I tried to avoid answering the question because it's another fairly long discourse. Essentially, we came to the view that Africa suffered from two things: bad luck and bad policy. Bad luck because you hit the adjustment period just as China really took off as the world's engine of global manufacturing. So by the time you come out of the adjustment period in 1995-2000, you're no longer competing against the industrial North, you're competing against China. And we saw that in the statistics in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I agree with Helen, we're now in a different epoch, and this is, of course, something that Justin Lin has been emphasizing. So maybe the era of bad luck is finally coming to an end. Bad policy? I'm not convinced. And to the laundry list, he had 7 principles that I did. I found 4 of his that might be things wrong with leadership and policy choice in Africa. let me add a fifth, and I can do this as an alumnus of the same self-industry. I think we have to put this squarely in the lap of the donors. There is no other place in the world in which the donor industry exercises more influence on domestic public policy than in Africa. If you ask yourself, what have been the public policy initiatives of the donor industry in the last 25 years in Africa with respect to industry, I give you structural adjustment, privatization, and the investment climate. Bad policy. I rest my case.
On that note, if some of the panel still would like to respond, 1 minute, maybe Nick, you'd like to...
I will respond to that,
Okay.
but I think people would really like to hear from Helen.
Sure, well, I mean, both of you can speak for a minute. Would you like to go first, Helen?
I would like to quote one sentence the Prime Minister of Ethiopia once said. He said, "Industrialization for me is like biting a cake. You have to first bite it, taste the sweetness of it, and you want to keep biting more." And I want to say that actually summarized my experience. When I put my feet in Ethiopia, did I got all the trust from the government? No, you have to prove once you started the production, once you actually job being created. And then once they are seeing this actually works, they will support you very much. So going back to your question, talking about organization level, political level, how do you make the change? I would say action is always louder than words. And you have to make it actually quick. That's why I really think in Africa, because the government change every 3 or 5 years, you have to really create quick, successful examples, because that is the best action to demonstrate this is the way it can work. Thank you.
Good. Nick?
Yeah, sure. Dirk, is this now being recorded, and so will now be indelibly on the internet forever? Because that might slightly influence my answer.
It is still recorded, Nick.
Oh, is it? Okay, in that case, I'll
No
put
Chatham House rules here.
I'll put my diplomatic face on. Okay, firstly, diaspora, which goes to your point as well of product design. I think the diaspora is incredibly important. Absolutely incredibly important, because you are the bridge between the technology frontier and developing economies. John was talking about this. A critical constraint is market knowledge, and market and practice and management practice. You are the best bridge of that. So, occasionally you see it, don't you? So in Ghana is full of firms started by diaspora members, and those firms are, they clean up. They are the most efficient. They know the networks. They're doing really, really well. So the diaspora is incredibly, incredibly important. I have a little caution about remittances, in that I don't think that necessarily a wall of remittances that arrive in countries is necessarily an answer to industrialization. It can cause a kind of overvaluation, a Dutch disease effect. So it depends what you spend the remittances on. If remittances are invested in local businesses, good news. If remittances are only consumed, then that can be bad news. So there's plenty of remittance-based economies that have got themselves in a Dutch disease trap. Okay, the one you want to hear about, donors as part of the problem. I have some sympathy with that. I think there are enormous pressures on donors sometimes to spend in a way that is like bad remittances, to spend on consumption. In that our electorates are very keen to see pictures of healthy, happy children and the easily communicated development benefits. Whereas if we show pictures of, a new tax office or a lovely new border post with good trade facilitation or a crane at a port, then it's harder to sell. So bilateral donors have got an uphill struggle to sell good, sensible economic development to our electorate. Multilaterals have an easier time of it because they are one stage removed in accountability. And I think yeah, some of that was mistaken. I think sometimes structural adjustment was had bad PR. That when I started economics, it was on the the bank of the sort of all the lefties saying structural adjustment is just making everything worse. But I think sometimes the structural adjustment was combined with that period of bad luck, that Africa was trying to structurally adjust with no safety net at a period where commodities were incredibly hostile and interest rates were incredibly hostile. It was the worst possible time. So yes, no, I take your criticism in part, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, very good. Okay, the last word to my co-host.
Yeah, thank you very much.
4 minutes.
Well, thank you very much for very interesting discussion. And my point is about the learning process. As I said, this kind of dialogue is also the learning process, how to promote industrialization. And even in the government level, there are lots of learning process, as I said. And Japan also, or JICA also conducts some study on how to reflect the Asian experience to African development. But the key point we found is that the industrial policy is important, and also flexibility of the government is also important, and clear linkage with private sectors. Those, through those elements, we can keep learning. And even in a farm level, Kaizen can promote different skills, but we can disaggregate the skills like technical skills specific to the industry, like textile or leather industries, and also management skills for the, the company. And also more fundamental core skills which relate to the household skills or more discipline or winning or leaderships. So based on those capacities, we can strengthen the farm.
All right. Well, that's been really good. So let me summarize in 1 minute, I suppose, at most, and then I'll let you go. I suppose we heard about the challenges, major challenges to industrialization, and we all agree that there are major challenges. And we all agree that these need to be overcome because industrialization and economic transformation is really important. We've also discussed a range of elements that can help to support economic transformation. We talked about skills, infrastructure, talked about investment climate as necessary but definitely not sufficient, or maybe even a bit damaging. But also that we need to think much more beyond that as well, and thinking about special economic zone, think about agglomeration, think about industrial policy, industrial learning in this. And all of this add to still a rather long range, long list of things that need to be done. But I don't think we should despair. I mean, I think that it's an example that was suggested by Helen, and your own experience suggests that actually things are possible, and that there are examples in African countries where things can happen, where things do happen, and it goes to show that a lot of work needs to be done, a lot of coordination needs to happen, and the right actors need to be involved at the right time. And I think that makes a very labor-intensive process. And also, we need to think about maybe the importance of demonstration projects here, where your project, for example, your investment project shows results. And I think that also comes back to the point that you mentioned about learning on industrial policy. Japanese have done it in the 50s. Now African countries are doing it, in some cases successfully. And I think that also tells really well with the program that I'm directing here at ODI on supporting economic transformation. And I think that everybody can look at the on the website on the website for the supporting economic transformation program, where we're really trying to also think about what is it that can be done about economic transformation. What is it that can be done to support this process? So I'd like to thank, well, first of all, you for being engaged and for putting up one or two hands. I think we have both answered the question, and there are also still some challenges out there that we still need to address. I would like to thank the discussants and for the very interesting stories and important contributions. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank John Page for being the excellent lead speaker, and I should recommend you looking into the books, or maybe just download the working papers on the UN Wider or Brookings website. So thank you very much for this excellent meeting.